I find the primary system very attractive, and I find the idea of voluntary voting very attractive, but I certainly don't find the idea of the district attorney being elected attractive. I think that has brought out some very bad matters. We've seen a problem in Canberra in the ACT, and we certainly don't want politicised DPPs in Australia, do we?
Yes, no, that's a very good point. I mean, I think something that the US could learn maybe from the Australian English system is that it's much more sensible to split that job of Attorney General, which in the US is kind of one person, if you like, kind of a minister in the government, but also the chief prosecutor. Whereas in Australia, as I understand it, we split those roles. There's a minister, and then there's a professional prosecutor who is meant to be, and I think broadly is, fairly politically impartial. As you say, in the ACT, that principle seems to have been transgressed, and that's a source of great embarrassment, I think, for Australia and its long-standing traditions of independent prosecutors. But yes, the US, I mean, that it does strike me as bizarre. And the district attorney in Georgia, Fani Willis, she's a very strong Democrat. She campaigned to prosecute Trump, and apparently she's been fundraising off this indictment. And her counterpart in New York, Alvin Bragg, is also a very strong Democrat, and he also campaigned to prosecute Donald Trump. Now, I mean, to me, that strikes as an abuse of the law, but it is American practice, at least in terms of the election of these figures.
We've never heard of these people before. Now they've become world public figures.
I know, it is quite something.
And they're not very great. They're not great people. They're not great lawyers. You can see that.
No, look, I mean, I kind of wish that I'd studied law at university a bit over the last 6 months, so I could have had, more profound insights on these various indictments. But I've read them and tried to think about it as a kind of rational person. And my sense is that every single one of them, except the documents case, will be dismissed, will be thrown out eventually at some level of court, because they're just too ridiculous. It relies so much on what Donald Trump was thinking at the time. What was his intent? And that's so hard to prove. And he still says, that he believes the election was stolen, and he's not the only one. A lot of, I think about a third of Americans believe that. So, I guess a third of Americans might be delusional, but they do believe it, and they believe he believes it. And so if he does, then you really are prosecuting someone to some extent for their beliefs. And that is very problematic.
Well, if you look at that case that Texas brought in the Supreme Court with a number of other states, I think about 17 states, that wasn't based on actual fraud. That was based on breaches of the Constitution in relation to changes of the electoral law. And the only reason the judges didn't hear it was because they said that Texas lacked standing. I suspect that part of it was they were afraid of the consequences if they heard it, and not only on the nation, but also on themselves.
Yes, look, I think that's, I mean, that particular case, you're more across the details of that than me. But it is true, as I understand it, that in relation to the allegations of fraud in 2020, very few of them, if any, were actually seriously considered by courts. Most of them were not even heard in the first place. My view is that, there was never enough. My view is there's always fraud in every election. I mean, it's just a question of extent. But my view also would be that, there just wasn't enough fraud to have made the difference in that 2020 election. There were millions of votes difference between the two candidates ultimately. But yes, look, regardless of what the truth actually was, I mean, I think prosecuting Trump for this is a big mistake, and it could come back to backfire. I mean, if there's a recession next year in the US, which may well be the case, and you have a Joe Biden there who can barely speak, and Trump as the Republican nominee, still articulate, still vigorous, there's every chance he could win again.